Gill, 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. Introduction to chapter 2. The apostle in this chapter gives a further account of his ministry among the Thessalonians, of the nature, manner, and success of it, and of his regard to them, and conduct and conversation when with them, and commends their readiness in receiving the gospel, and excuses his present absence from them. He appeals to them themselves for the truth of it, that his entry to them or preaching among them was not in vain and without success. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 1. That it was with all boldness and intrepidity of mind, notwithstanding what he had suffered before for it, 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 2, and with all integrity and faithfulness to the trust reposed in him by the Lord, without deceit and guile, or seeking to please men, but God the searcher of hearts, who had committed this trust unto him, 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3, and that neither then nor at any other time he had used flattery or showed covetousness, which he calls God to witness, 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 5. Nor of them or others sought glory and honor, even that which was due unto him by virtue of his office, 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 6, but had showed all gentleness, humanity, and affection, which he illustrates by the slim of his nurse cherishing her children, 1 Thessalonians 2:7, and by the willingness he showed not only to preach the gospel to them, but to lay down his life for them, had it been necessary, so great was his affection for them. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 8. And as a proof of this, he puts them in mind of his labors, both in preaching the word and in working with his own hands, because he would not be burdensome and chargeable to them. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 9. And as for his conversation among them, he appeals both to God and them, how holy, just, and unblemished it was. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 10. And reminds them of his tenderness, diligency, and faithfulness, in exhorting, comforting, and charging them, particularly to walk worthy of God, since he had called them to his kingdom and glory. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 11. And then he expresses his thankfulness to God for their reception of the worthy of the gospel, not as an human invention, but as of God, which wrought effectually in them, 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 13, the evidence of which were partly their imitation of the church of Christ in Judah, in doctrine and practice, and partly their suffering the same things they did of the Jews, 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 14, who are described by their ill use each of and cruelty to Christ, their own prophets and his apostles, by their not pleasing God, and by their opposition to men, an instance of which is given in prohibiting the apostles to preach to the Gentiles, whose end in so doing, with respect to the Gentiles, was that they might not be saved, but God's end in suffering them to do so was with respect to them that they might fill up their iniquity, and so entire wrath and ruin come upon them as had been foretold. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 15. And then the apostle concludes the chapter by expressing his affectionate concern in parting with them, which was not in heart but in body, by declaring his earnest desire and endeavor to see them again, and by observing to them the reason he had not and could not come unto them, because Satan hindered him. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 17. And the cause of his being so desirous to see them was their being his hope, joy, glory, and crown of rejoicing, both now and hereafter. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 19. End of the introduction of chapter 2 of Gill, brought to you by Discovering the Scriptures, being read by Dr. Peter John.